Greetings once more. Welcome to the Dracovin Empire. Are you ready to dive into the Demiplanes of Dread once more? Yes, heading back to Ravenloft to learn of a pair of Darklords. Ones that are very different, in very similar yet different domains. Ones that could be called the same, but also could be called different. Yes, we're talking about Dominic and Saidra D'Honaire. And of course, the realm of Dementlieu. If I'm butchering these names, apologies. I'm your host and guide here, Tantus Dracovin. I can lead you through the mists to Dementlieu. If you are ready, you just have to take my hand. But before we go, please do tip me a little bit. Liking, and subscribing over on the YouTube side of things. And of course, what are your thoughts on this? On the twin D'Honaires and twin Dementlius? I'd be honest, interested in what you think in the comments below. Let us go. Ravenloft and the Demiplanes of Dread. Oh wait, my gate only lasts so long. The darkness and the mists, we have arrived. Now, my two main sources here, which you could dive into a little deeper, especially if you want to play in these regions and deal with these creatures of the night, are two books. One from the earlier editions, where we talk about Dominic, and one from the new editions, where we talk about Saidra. For Saidra, of course, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, 5th edition. And for Dominic, I'd recommend Domains of Dread, though Dominic does appear, and Dementlieu appears, in many other books. But this is the one I focused on primarily, because it's one of the most up-to-date when it came to 2nd edition, other than the basic representations and mentions of him in the story. Why don't we start with these two, and start with understanding each of them, presenting my case for these two different Darklords. Perhaps a way that they are related, but perhaps ways that they are not. Perhaps ways that one may be better than the other. And let us start with Dominic. Now, Dominic is interesting. Our first of our pair of Darklords. I would say, before we talk about Dominic, he's one that's a little bit more boring, a little bit more subtle, but presents an interesting case. You see, Dominic was the grandson of Germain D'Honaire, a mesmerist and mordant, so he's related to Ravenloft. And it was when he became part of Ravenloft, came into being here. So, Dominic was very similar to his grandfather, expert at manipulating, tricking, deceiving. A handsome boy, flirtatious with the ladies, who was harmless and charming in a lot of ways. And when his grandfather died, they left Mordant. At Dominic's behest. His father thought it was his idea, but no. And when they came to a new land, Dementlieu, well, it opened up for little Dominic. Something about him made him a dark. And here's where the thing about Dominic is uninteresting. His backstory. There is no darkness here. He just lived in Ravenloft and happened to be a mesmerist and became a Darklord. Now, if we look at him as a Darklord, he's a manipulator. He is not in charge of Dementlieu. No. He's perhaps the head of the council, which advises the ruler. He's a spider, a complex wave. He has his own curse, too. His curse is a very poor, stupid one. Also, I don't like it at all. Basically, if he gets romantically attached with someone, they see him as more and more ugly and hate him more and more, so he can't have love. So in his official marriage, it's a loveless one, that's a political one, no emotional bonds, because if, to the vision of someone he'd fall in love with, he just becomes ugly and more horrible. And he can close his borders, trick people not being able to leave his version to Dementlieu. They think that they're just traveling the lands, and eventually end up back in the big cities. And he is a powerful mind spellcaster. Just by looking at him, you can be charmed, dominated. His words carry suggestion to him. His eyes, domination. Constantly. You constantly must vibe not to be mind controlled by this man. And so he subtly influences people and controls things from the shadows. this is the interesting part about him. The abilities he has, the dark manipulation, the subtlety. And we talk about his version of Dementlieu. It reflects that. But again, a lot of him is boring, kind of there. His backstory, why is he a Dark Lord? I don't know. His curse, but he's just a man with mind powers. Saidra, on the other hand. Saidra is a much more interesting character in a lot of ways, but it's also very different. Saidra isn't a manipulator. Sydra's a terrible wraith. So, Saidra is interesting for her own backstory. While Dominic might not necessarily born into the most wealthiest family, but probably was born into it. Saidra was called Duchess by her father, who actually did pretend to be a noble in her eyes. She didn't know about this at first. That he basically said, I was driven out by my older brother. I was going to be a duke, so you were a duchess. Her mother was dead. Her father remarried to an older mother and some step-siblings who laughed off her duchessness. Basically, eventually, though, the Duke of the area died. And when Saidra was like, father, was that your brother who drove you out from your position? The father admitted that he was just a commoner who was driven from the kitchen. Saidra hated this. Left. Basically, a figure appeared at her mother's grave and gave her magical gown and fine jewelry, sent her to there. Allowed her to go to a ball with the new Duke. She wanted to be desired to the Duke, to murder him, to take over. But, basically, she thought of an alternative thing. Her original thing was just to murder the Duke and take over, because her father lied, but she couldn't take over that position. She could be the Duchess. Maybe just marry him and then do it. Maybe control him. But the gift of address of the story of Cinderella here is one of terror. When the clock struck midnight, death came to those that were there. Yes. Plague racked everything. Saidra, the Duke, all the guests rapidly became sick and died. They lied in each other's arms. And Saidra learned once again that she was lied to. This new Duke was the son of a servant who fled the house. The true Duke was unable to have children. So he raised the servant's infant son. He was her brother. She killed him, drove her blade that she had hidden into his heart, and collapsed to the floor. And then woke up in her estate, in Dementlieu, in Port Lucine, a true duchess, but also a wraith. No longer living. Now she holds masquerade balls. And also is a spirit that stalks the city known as the Red Death, after the plague, which killed everyone there. So, could they be related? Sure. She could be an Honoré. Certainly I saw an interesting idea from someone when they talked about it online. I looked into some discussions that perhaps, if you wanted to include them in the story, Dominic could have been the old Duke. Perhaps it was just Dementlieu that this was taking place in. That he had invited, he had adopted Saidra's brother. And she took on the name of the Duke, the Honoré, once everything had said and done, and that Dominic passed away, or died off, replaced by Saidra. Because maybe Ravenloft itself, the Domains of Dread, they have a will, they could have replaced Dominic. Dominic is kind of lame. So there could be connections there, or there might not be at all, they just might have the same last name. But you can see that Saidra is a much more complex, interesting character. But different kind of Dark Lord. And exploring this concept of a different type of Dark Lord, we do have to talk about the two versions of Dementlieu. And then we'll talk about some themes that do match him, and how the themes are also different. with the Nobility and the Masquerade. So let's talk about the old Dementlieu. What was there? What kind of place it was? And these are where some of the differences begin to be shown. Dementlieu was a land. Now, it was a coastal domain on the Sea of Sorrows, and it was part of the core of Ravenloft. Meaning this is back before, yes, there are mists between the lands, but the lands are technically connected in a lot of ways, so keep that in mind. And again, as Ravenloft evolves, the core breaks apart, and all the things that happen with various other Darklords, things happen. This has, of course, the great city of Port-et-Lucine, the largest settlement on the Paramount Bay, where thousands of people live. It's got his fortress, his government. There are also the guilds that here, where there's Axtons, the great churches. And nearby is Chatafox, a trade village on the border, where it has smaller producers. Many of the thousand souls have left there, headed to the main city, because the mayor lost his mind. It's a flat land that's hilly as you travel northward. Forest, heaths, sandy earth. And the only thing that grows properly? Potatoes. The people? One of the most civilized in all of Ravenloft. Producing some fine portraits and landscapes. Scientifically logical people. They take care of the poor citizens of the town, shelter them. The gentry, though, treat the poor as slaves. You look after them if you work for us. Poverty, disease, crime, and murder are very common in the lower levels. The gentry have their fashion trends all throughout the core. So yes, it's an interesting land, ruled by Lord Governor Marcel Guignon, and a council of 5 advisors, headed by Dominic. Yes. The city militia, helping the Lord Governor, advising and enforcing the laws he puts forth. Of course, advised by Dom. So, that's our old Dementlieu. Now, granted, it's probably not a very dark place in a lot of ways, and a very interesting location. But there are aspects of it that are still very interesting, and it's a land. When we move to New Dementlieu, it's just this. Just the city. An odd thing about the entire. Now, aspects of the city could be combined with the new and old. We can talk about that in a minute. But if we look at the new version of it, it's just Port-et-Lucine. Just the city. That's it. The night there. The glamours. The exciting lights. The fine clothes, elegant jewelry, ballrooms. The grand masquerade, hosted by Duchess Saidra D'Honaire every 7th day on her island estate. If you attend the Duchess's balls, you're everyone that's anyone. You want an invitation, or to sneak in uninvited. But if you dare set foot there, where you don't belong, well, it could be fatal. The waters of Paramount and Lucine Bay, the shifting fog that surround the port, the mire of rot and decay that is the city. Everyone in Dementlieu basically tries to keep social appearances. But it's a social ruin. The poor citizens pretend to be middle class, scrounging through garbage heaps at night to sell wares in their shops in the morning. The middle class pretend to be aristocrats. They wear match-patched and mended clothes, starve for weeks to host balls that barely pass as lavish, and recycle table scraps into mysterious pâtés and cleverly disguised dumplings. And the real aristocracy, the Duchess herself, is truly the only one. And if you make the mask slip, well, you're dead. If you lose a button to a frayed coat, you're declared an imposter, unmasked, and you crumble to dust. A struggling merchant that basically fails to keep up appearance dies. And fall to the Red Death. the spirit that haunts the land. Basically, the Duchess herself. So yes, all the luncheons, balls, teas, dinners, fine galleries, it's all illusion. But if you want to be anybody that's anybody, you head to the Duchess's event. Everyone pretends to be wealthier. No one does anything. And the day-to-day is still in Lord Governor Marcel Guignol's hands, with a council of 5, led by Duchess Saidra, who write the laws and help judge everything. Masks are very important. Many people know their neighbors by their masks rather than their faces. There are many important places. But now we know what's going on. And here's an important part. If the borders are closed, the mists don't rise. Instead, you head out to the lands of Characeter, the rolling hills, the lush farmlands, the vineyards. The houses never get closer, and the longer you travel, you always find yourself back in the outskirts of Port Alassou. I did forget to mention Saidra's torment. I did. We should probably talk about that before we compare these two. My bad. She fears being unmasked, about her origins not being a duchess. She seeks her lost family when she becomes the Red Death. And she can't enjoy the pleasures that she affords now as a noble because she's a wraith. So, interesting. We went from a small land, small village, and places supported to just a city. It's one of those weird things that Ravenloft is very bad, especially 5th edition, about explaining how these places work. How does the city get food? How does the city survive? None of that's really answered, it just does. That's why I think the shrinking of Dementlieu to just the city doesn't really work. Those rolling hills, maybe some of those houses we got to. But eventually, maybe there's more of them out there that you can never reach. It can be larger, it can be more than land, it could be more than that. There's just so much about it. Now here's a map of the core where Dementlieu is. It's over there on the left side. But I wanted to talk about the Grand Masquerade and Nobility, and the aspects of it that exist within this, and comparing these two, and diving into it deeper. So the Grand Masquerade is a very important part of the new lore. Basically, it's the big event everybody goes to, run by the Duchess. It's the big party that you end up at, the social place, where you're invited, you have the big costumes, you have to keep up the entire idea of the mask. It's the ultimate representation of it. So that's why this idea of nobility is very important within Dementlieu as it is new. It's also important as it is in the old one in a lot of ways. We cannot stress that the fact that the nobility is in fact a shadow abuser of everybody in the new one. That keeping the status quo and those that are high at the top are very important to dominate. Saidra also keeps it that those at top are important, but you also have to pretend to be at top. You have to pretend. It is all about the illusion that Saidra has herself on everybody else. But it's also that trying to find people, find your lost people, when you cannot see them because everybody is hidden beneath their masks. And that you can't afford and enjoy these things. Basically, the curse that Saidra's under, she spreads to everyone else in Dementlieu. It's a fascinating kind of thing. And if Dementlieu was more developed land, I feel like it would be a lot more important and more interesting. And this is where, like, I am in agreement with a lot of people that old Dementlieu had a lot more feeling, a lot more essence, because it was large and it was more than just a city. It felt more like a land. And there could be more stories told about that. While new Dementlieu is got a lot of interest in it with the way that their society is built, but also it just doesn't work very well. Keeping up the mask might be great for anybody of importance, but even like the lower class trying to do it, how? Everything is garbage, everything is rot, there is nothing fresh. How do they survive? It makes no logical sense in a lot of ways, and yes, it's a horror adventure. And for a small visit, maybe. But again, like, I think the thing about a lot of horror is it works when it is got a cornerstone of something real about it. Something that you can relate this being a little too fantastical. Perhaps they're using magic. Perhaps the members of the Grand Church, which also, Mother of Tears Cathedral, does that resist Saidra? A great powerful place of religious. If it's there and it's so important, there's so many questions that exist within this version of it. It is interesting because Dominic has some interesting aspect, but it's kind of boring. I would have liked more ideas of an updated version of the Mesmerist and Mind Controller to be in existence. Perhaps the Plague existing. Saidra as this wraith that just disintegrates people is neat. But there are aspects of Dominic which are much more fascinating and could be explored in a lot of ways. Dominic was basically, and the old Dementlieu had a lot of boringness and not very heavily deep explored. But there were aspects of it that were very interesting and well developed. New Dementlieu and Saidra have much more interesting kind of backstory in a lot of ways, but they're also, honestly speaking, just a little short. It's sort of like, I think that's the exploration of all of this. And why don't we move on to the final thoughts about this? These are both very interesting characters and very interesting places, but they are kind of similar, but also very different. They're very different stories, very different type of horror. One of them is the horror of mind control, of messing with it, of, you know, it's, you don't have your mind, you're under the control of someone, you are being forced into a situation. I think that's old Dementlieu supposed to represent. New Dementlieu is this kind of illusion of greatness. And it is very different kind of directions. I think these updates work best when they follow the same kind of things. I don't think the Mesmerist idea was a bad idea, of someone mind controlling you, losing your bodily autonomy to your mind, to someone controlling your mind. There is horror in that. And I think the exploration of that was not done necessarily at all. They kind of just ignored that because it is a much harder, deeper psychological horror, you know? And maybe they had felt like something else they already done did psychological horror. I guess, you know, your Cthulhuian horror with Plutstat and the brain there kind of works on that, but that's more Cthulhuian horror though too. Again, it's like we could have had something here. It's interesting. It's got some problems. But again, it's one of those points in time where they are same but very different. And it's where I both love and hate the updates 5e does. You know? Saidra, much more interesting character. Maybe make her something on her own. Making her connected to the D'Honaire might have been interesting too. Having that story, having the connections to the old lords into the new lords. Then I could have seen it as something, that story where Dominic is the old duke and he couldn't have a top child because he doesn't have these like relationships, because of his lovelessness, because he could not have someone. Make his curse worse. He cannot find love, he cannot find physical connections, he cannot have a person, you know, a successor. Make it that his curse is worse. You know, there are ways to explore it that make these more interesting. Honestly speaking, I think you could update old Dominic in a lot of ways and make him more interesting. And I think you could bring in some of those aspects of old Dementlieu to new Dementlieu, even if you want to just use Saidra. I think I would also like just have the poor there, looked after. I think the poor not being part of the Masquerade would say more. They're free from the Masquerade, but perhaps those of the middle and wealthy class treat them horribly. They look after them, but they are technically the servants. They are technically the people that are akin to labor, deep under them. They are mistreated. That shows some of that, you know, corrupt officials, that, you know, it shows that want of greatness, the putting on the mask, the becoming great, the becoming top tier, the hiding behind that, to being what Saidra desired, is corrupting and evil and terrible. And you can't enjoy those things at your station. You can't enjoy that. You have to keep the mask on. It's not worth it, but you also become corrupted by it. Fascinating kind of things. There is probably better ways to explore a lot of this and improve it. And I think this is one of those ones that I feel both need fixing. They're both fascinating, but if you're going to use them, I'd say use information from both of them and find something in a middle ground using either Dominic or Saidra and explore the concepts behind both of them. The Dominic, mind controlling, losing your autonomy, being under someone's width, and Saidra, the illusion of greatness, the illusion of nobility. The fact that, you hide yourself behind a mask. Both of these are very interesting directions to do that, you don't know what's behind the mask, if it's just a monster or a person, and oftentimes it is a monster. And very few times it's not. There are ways to explore both of these. And to improve Dementlieu. I mean, the old one needs some improving, and the new one is kind of improved, but also worse. It's find something in the middle. Anyway. That'll be it for today. I hope you enjoyed diving into this. If you want to check out more of my stuff, you can check me live over on Twitch or over up on the YouTube side of things. Twitch is where I record tabletop stuff. That includes stuff like this. Live plays like Fall of Adamsville Wednesdays at 8, my current one. Live shows where I talk about news of the week, like discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6. We discuss news, deeper discussion topics, all those kind of things. It's kind of podcasty. All that stuff does end up in YouTube. All my tabletop stuff, that's where my YouTube stuff ends up at. So you can just catch me there if you don't want to catch anything else. But hey, that's also got old live plays, all kinds of old stuff. I've got a lot of material over there. Check out my social media for updates and all kinds of things. And hey, until next time we dive into the mists or somewhere else, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.